兄弟姊妹好早起 ，Happy New Year， 新年快乐！咱坐真呢继续敬拜咱的上帝。第4篇62篇第5到第6节，安提讲：我的心啊，恁当别念无声，专心听晓上帝，因为我的盼望是在伊遐来的，唯独伊是我的磐石，我的拯救，伊是我的关台，我定确袂动摇。
神给的路线，遵行他的教导，一天比一天更好。回应神的呼召，看见世界的需要，感受耶稣的爱，我勇敢跳起来。我要靠着神灵翻转地球，背起十架走入人群中，向黑暗全势宣告 I'm not afraid， 因为耶稣他已经得胜。焚烧，渴望复兴来到，要见证神的荣耀。同心合一祷告，神灵的火来焚烧，渴望复兴来到，要见证神的荣耀。我要靠着神灵翻转地球，背起十架走入人群中，向黑暗全势宣告 I'm not afraid， 因为耶稣他已经得胜。我要靠着神灵翻转地球，背起十架走入人群中，向黑暗全势宣告 I'm not afraid， 因为耶稣他已经得胜。
大，旷野这呢宽，有你同在无忧喘。若是有你伫我的生命，我就永远袂孤单。有你三做伴，甲你斗阵行，充满温暖陪每关。海水的干，石头的热，你的疼痛无变远。甘愿为我受尽拖磨，将我当作你心肝。海水的干，石头的热，你的疼痛无变远。温情这大，怎样感谢你先甲主念相我。
咱会三合头祈祷。亲爱的天父，阮感谢你带阮来到伫即个新的一年。当阮回头看顶一年，虽然即年带来真多的无稳定，也带来互阮真多想袂到的灾难，互全世界的经济大大的降落。主，阮毋知影即疫情也会拖偌久。若是主，阮知影你来坐伫宝座顶，掌管一切。阮也是要多谢你，因为这是你赐互阮的平安，是即个世界无法通互阮的。主，帮助阮伫即个新的一年，互阮的盼望茫放伫即个世界顶，乃是将你重点放伫你的心顶。即个礼拜，阮要开始检查祈祷，主帮助阮伫即个新的一年，阮有新的，也有对的开始，要来祈求你，要来亲近你，伫一切事项内有你的祝福，来求你看顾明仔早起阮每一口气，伊才要来敬拜你的，保守阮的网络。望互魔鬼来调查阮，这个是阮的祈祷，阮的感恩，靠主耶稣基督的名求，阿门。咱今仔早起的经文是伫但以理书第1章第1到第7节。犹太王约雅敬伫位第3年，巴比伦王尼波甲尼撒来到耶路撒冷，将城围困。主将犹太王约雅敬逼上帝殿中的器皿的几份交付伫伊的手，伊就将这器皿带到神那底，收入伊神的庙内，放伫伊神的库中。王吩咐太监长阿斯蒂娜带以色列人的装饰甲几场中带掠来几个人，就是少年无参七，上无准备，通达各项学问，知识聪明具备，教育是入伫王宫内的，要教因加列底的文理言语。王派定将伊家己所用的饷甲所啉的酒，每日赐互因一份，饲因3年，满了3年，好叫因伫王面前侍立。因中间有犹大族的人，但以理、哈拿尼亚、米沙利、阿撒利亚。太监长互因起名，称但以理为伯提沙撒，称哈拿尼亚为沙德列，称米撒为米索，称阿撒利亚为阿伯尼哥。咱今仔早起的讲员是咱舞会的红传道Francis Ang，咱的翻译员是三峰兄，咱就即将这个时间来交托互恁。
Good morning, UECG Metro East. Happy Lord's Day to all.
青山基督教会东区的兄弟姊妹主日好。
And Happy New Year as well.
同時祝恁新年快樂。
I hope that one day we will be meeting face to face and greet one another with shaking of hands.
望一日咱有當個面對面三度來三合崇拜上主，並且有當三合來洗手。
But this Lord's Day, allow me to share with you a passage from Daniel chapter 1 entitled Christlike Life is in a Christless Society.
今仔早起，如果對但以理書第1章這段經文來甲咱分享， 就是一个题目叫做无基督的社会内面的基督徒生活。
You know, in studying Philippine history, we learned that our country was colonized by the Spaniards for more than 300 years.
当咱读菲律宾的历史的时阵，咱知影讲咱这个国家曾经是西班牙国的殖民地就差不多300几年久的时间。
As a colony, Filipinos were taught to adopt Spanish way of life, the way they live, speak, and think.
做一个殖民地咱菲律宾人就是着学习来采用在西班牙因的生活方式、讲话，并且思考的方法。
Understanding a country's history helps us to understand the situation of Daniel and his friends during the time they were exiled to Babylon.
当咱咧读这个历史的时阵咱帮助咱较有能了解讲说，但以理甲伊怀朋友当时受掠到巴比伦国的时阵，迄款的处境。
They were taught a Babylonian way of life, learning their culture, literature, and spiritual belief.
当因伫受掠的时阵因受教就是关于巴比伦国的这些生活方式文化、文学，并且信仰方面。
This morning, we are going to see how Daniel and his friends remained faithful to God in assimilating their lives in the pagan world as God handed Judah over to the Babylonians.
今仔日早起，咱要学习的就是要看到但以理甲伊的朋友怎伫这个受掠的这个无信异教的国家的内面虽然有接受同化，但是因着有缘忠心来侍奉上帝。
Let's talk about God's faithfulness.
大先咱来讲到上帝的信实。
Judah's exile from the land in Daniel's time was not merely an accident of fate or the tragic result of the expansion of Babylonian Empire.
犹太人受掠的时阵，这样代志伫但以理的时阵并不是一个偶然的代志也不是一个悲伤的特别的结果。因为巴比伦国的这个空间而来。
As Daniel 1 verse 2 makes clear, the exile came upon Judah because the Lord handed King Jehoiakim over the power of Nebuchadnezzar.
咱来看但以理书第1章第2节的时阵这个真清楚的甲人讲是上帝将约雅敬犹大王约雅敬交伫尼布甲尼撒王的手中。
And God gave his people into the hand of their enemies.
上帝将伊的子民交伫敌人的手中
The Lord had warned Israel of the consequences of their sins in the book of Leviticus.
上帝曾经伫这个利未记的所在一定警告在以色列人关于因无尊敬，因的罪的结局是什么
？God made a covenant with them, a covenant that included blessings for obedience and curses for disobedience.
上帝甲因曾经立约一个盟约的内容是什么就是当因顺服的时阵，得到祝福；当因无顺服的时阵，就会受咒诅。
However, the exile of Daniel and his friends was not merely a fulfillment of the great covenantal curse of Leviticus 26.
连伫这个但以理甲伊的朋友，并且在伊实现这个利未记26章所记的这个咒诅。
It was also the specific fulfillment of Isaiah's prophecy in 2 Kings 20:18.
事实上，这个也是以赛亚书预言伫列王记下20章所预言的代志具体的实现。
Judah's king Hezekiah had received envoys and a gift from Merodach-Baladan, son of the king of Babylon.
希西家王伊接受巴比伦国的使者，并且对这个比罗达巴拉旦，就是巴比伦王的囝啊，来接受伊的礼物。
In response, Hezekiah showed them everything that was of value on his storehouses and all of his treasures.
伊做什么款的回应呢？希西家王得到这礼物以后，伊就将伊的宝库中间敞开，将所有的宝物啊、财富啊，互这使者来看。
For this action, he was condemned by the prophet Isaiah.
因为伊安尼做啊，伊就责备。
Why was the Lord so upset with Hezekiah?
为什么上帝对伊所做这样代志非常的无欢喜呢？
The envoys and gifts Hezekiah received from Merodach-Baladan was not just a friendly gesture of goodwill. Rather, it was a solicitation of help and support against Assyria.
因为这个巴比伦王的囝所带来使者在的礼物啊，不是单单不是一款善意的友好的这个表示啊，伊乃是要来要求以色列国啊，就是希西家王甲因联合来攻打亚述国啊。
So, when Hezekiah showed the envoy his treasure houses, he was responding positively on the alliance with the Babylonians to fight against the Assyrians.
所以当希西家王将这些宝物啊，当使者看的时阵啊，一方面伊就是用正面的来回应啊，因的要求啊，意思讲要甲因联名啊，来杀拍这个亚述国。
In spite of the Lord's miraculous deliverance of Jerusalem from the surrounding armies of Sennacherib and the Assyrians in the previous chapter of the book of Kings, Hezekiah was now looking to a political means for solving the Assyrian problem through alliance with Babylon.
尽管啊，伫列王纪上记下这个所在所记载的，就是讲说啊，上帝啊，一定真正用心力来拯救耶路撒冷甲以色列国脱离亚述国甲西拿基立代志啊，但是希西家王啊，却袂记得伊可用咧亲切用建国的问题啊，就是借着甲这个巴比伦国来联名啊。
Politics had replaced trust in.
所以对这样代志，咱看到讲说，希西家王啊，用政治来代替了伊对上帝的信靠。
This is not merely an ancient temptation. Modern people, too, may be tempted to place their hopes in political alliances rather than trusting the Lord wholeheartedly.
这毋是单单过去古早时的一款的试探，现在咱的人，真侪人也是逐摆伫一款的试探当中，袂记得将咱的愿望啊放伫甲在政治方面的联名啊，咱袂记得讲说着用专心来信靠咱的上帝。
Isaiah's word of judgment on Hezekiah's action was specific and severe.
先知以赛亚所讲的对希西家王的这种审判，伊是非常的具体，并且真正严重。
Because Hezekiah sought to preserve his treasures by trusting Babylon, and the Babylonians would come to carry off everything in his palace.
因为希西家王选择要来保留伊在财富就是靠着信靠这个巴比伦国嘛，所以过后巴比伦国的人 就来到这个所在，到以色列国，将这些所有宫殿内面的宝物啊，拢带去。
This specific judgment came through from the opening words of Daniel chapter 1, verse 2.
这个具体的审判真正明显的对但以理书第1、第2章清楚的记载。
God's judgment upon Hezekiah had been faithfully carried through, just as Isaiah had said.
上帝的审判真正明显的按照先知以赛亚所讲的伫真真实的会发生伫以西家王的身上。
This shows us God's faithfulness in his words and covenant, isn't it?
这样代志，互人看真清楚，讲说上帝对伊所讲的话，甲伊的约是真正真实的。
And that is good. That is great.
这样代志，互人甲你讲真好。
Second point, let's talk about the encouragement of God's faithfulness.
第2点，咱来看就是上帝信实对咱的鼓励。
The recognition that their fate came from the hand of God as a faithful act of judgment was itself an encouragement to the exiles.
明白讲说，因所得的命令是来对上帝的手来的，是一款忠实的审判的行为哦。这本身是对这种受虐的人一款的鼓励。
It shows that their future was not controlled by Babylon or its gods, but by the Lord, the God of heaven, Yahweh.
因清楚很看到讲，因的将来，因的未来，不是受巴比伦甲伊的神诸神来控制，乃是受到上帝，就是这个天顶的上帝的主宰。
This is an important point. Matthew 10:29 says that the sparrow does not fall to the ground without God's permission.
这个是一个真重要的一点，就是亲像马太福音10章29节所记载的，讲说，若唔是上帝的恩准这种麻雀一只拢袂会落地地上。
Which demonstrates that even the most trivial of events in our life are within God's view.
这个互咱正面看到讲说真正细项无值得满意的一寡代志咱生命中的一寡代志有原是伫上帝的这个看视野的内面。
At the extreme, even the most wicked act of all time, the crucifixion of Jesus was also the outworking of God's predetermined purpose.
在极端的就是讲说伫世上是人类历史中面最伫邪恶的一款一个行动就是耶稣基督神顶起这项代志事实上有原是伫上帝所预定的这个目的内面。
For us believers, each circumstance is the Lord's means of sanctifying us.
咱做一个信徒，无论什么款的情形拢是上帝一个机会，要互咱正圣。
He has not abandoned nor forgotten us.
因捌袂记，也捌弃绝咱。
On the contrary, He will walk through these trials with us and preserve us by His grace.
相反的伊会甲咱伫咱的试炼的当中，甲咱同行，并且来保守咱，用伊的恩典来保守咱。
And this will then give us motivation to keep doing His will.
这项代志就有法当，互咱有这个推动力啊，通来继续来遵行伊的旨意。
And just to prove that God was faithful and the people during that time, the exiled people, are trusting God all the more, I want to highlight some few points. And let's start with the resisting of reprogramming.
就要证明讲说，当即阵人受掠的时阵是上印度，什么意思呢？咱对几项代志，咱就看者头先，就是咱看着讲因拒绝受改造，受巴比伦国的改造。
It was the will of God that Daniel and his three friends Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were exiled in Babylon.
这个但以理甲伊的三个朋友，哈拿尼亚、米沙利甲阿撒利亚，因受掠啊，通讲是上帝本身的旨意啊。
The four were probably still in their teenage years when they were to be exposed to an intense program of re-education in Babylon.
第四位受掠的时阵啊，因也阁是伫真正少年的时期啊，因遐所面对的是一个真正强烈，并且对因的教育搁在一个搁在教育的一个假象啊。
First, their very names were changed.
第台先这个巴比伦国就先改换伊的名。
In place of their good, God-centered Hebrew and Yahwistic names, the Babylonians changed them to the Babylonian names.
本来因的希伯来古的名佮属上帝的名即个巴比伦国就该换名换做即个巴比伦文化的名。
Daniel means God is my judge.
但以理的意思是讲上帝是我的审判。
Hananiah means the Lord is gracious.
那尼亚的意思是讲上帝是仁慈的。
Mishael means who is what God is.
以色列的意思讲上是上帝，伊就是上帝。
And Azariah means the Lord is a helper.
阿撒尼亚的意思讲说上帝是帮助咱的。
They were changed to names Belteshazzar, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, respectively.
因就改变名做撒德列、米撒、阿别尼哥、别提沙撒。
And these names were invoked to help the Babylonian gods, Marduk, Bel, and Nebo.
这种名意思就是讲说要来帮赞要得到这种巴比伦国精神的帮赞啊。
Second, the four young men were also instructed in the language and literature of the Babylonians so that myths and legends would take place of the scriptures as the source of their wisdom and worldview.
第二这种少年人也是受管束这种巴比伦国的言语伊的文化文学并且包括伊在神话、故事、传说伊就是要望将这物件来代替圣经的假使真多因的聪明智慧和世界观的这个来源。
Third, they were to be royally supplied from the king's table with daily allowances of food and wine so that they would become familiar to the life of dependence on their new master.
第三点就是因所要食爱穿的， 所有的物件是要对王的这个苦来倒顶甲苦来底下来得到，这个就是要互因的熟悉，对这个对这个新的主人的生活的这款的依赖。
At the end of the 3-year reprogramming process, with their previous identity being taken away, they would then enter the service of Babylonian King Nebuchadnezzar.
这计划就是讲3年后当因受完全改造的时阵，因也袂记得因过去的身份或者讲因的身份一定受消灭的时阵，因就我当进入这个尼布甲尼撒王的这个服务的内面。
What's the main goal? Why they are doing this?
因的目的是什么呢？因为什么要安尼创呢？
The main goal of the whole procedure was to obliterate all memory of Israel and Israel's God from the lips and the minds of these young men, and to put in some dependence on the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, and their gods.
因第大的目的就是要对这些青年人的头脑内面当伊受改造以后将因过去对上帝的所有的认捌也该切起来该消灭然后会你开始认捌讲说这只咧供应因的这个王这是因着挖苦的。
Isn't this how Satan still operates today?
这敢是撒旦所咧用的手段嘛？今仔日。
He may violently persecute believers in some parts of the world, yet often he works more effectively by seducing, deceiving us into forgetting God and thinking that our blessings come from somewhere else.
是的，这个撒旦真侪世界真侪所在用强暴的方法来逼这些信徒。但是，咱知影伊更较有功效的方法，就是通过引诱甲欺骗咱，互咱袂记得上帝，并且认为讲说咱的祝福是来对别的所在、其他的所在来的。
Satan wants to control the educational process so that our children will grow up with his worldview, with his philosophies of life.
撒旦爱伫遐控制咱。这些教育的程序互咱的囡仔中大的时阵所明白的，在世界观甲这个哲学生活的哲学是世界要互伊的。
If he can further instill in us a sense of dependence upon the material comforts that make up our way of life, or certain pleasure of the world that we have grown to love, then he can far more effectively draw us away from the Lord.
耶稣撒旦有法当将咱互咱会觉得讲说，咱完全是依赖这个世界在物质方面的，才有法当互咱得到舒服的生活的时阵，并且咱会挖过一寡的乐趣，通来互咱愈来愈爱这些世上的物件的时阵然后咱就看到讲，伊真正有功效的，一定将咱拖愈来愈离开上帝。
Satan's fundamental goal is to take away our memory of God, to re-educate our minds to his way of thinking, and to instill in us a sense that all of the good things in life come from the world around us and from the satisfaction of the desires of our own flesh.
撒旦第基本的目的就是毋望对咱的这个思想的当中将咱对上帝的记忆全部会甲伊擦杀伊伫遐要用这款的教育来再改造咱，互咱有一款的思想，就是讲说世上所有的 好的物件，拢是对这个世界来的啊，并且啊，然后这种物件才有法来满足咱家己的肉体啊，甲需要啊。
You know, a while ago we talked about resisting reprogramming. Now, this time, let's go about talking about dependence in God.
咁啊，咱讲到因拒绝受改造啊，现在咱讲到倚靠上帝。
Now, recognizing the Babylonian strategy helps us to see and evaluate the strategy of resistance formulated by the 4 young men.
当咱清楚明白讲这巴比伦国所用的这个策略的时阵啊，咱就会了解讲这是4位青年人啊，因所制定的家己这款抵抗的策略是什么啊？
There are a lot of things that we can learn from them.
咱有通对因学习真多项的功课。
To be sure, they did not outwardly resist the Babylonian system.
头一项啊，咱看到讲这并无伫外表方面啊，来完全的抵抗这个巴比伦国的这个制度。
They also did not refuse to work for the Babylonians, perhaps because they recognized the hand of God in their situation.
相信因了解讲这项代志是上帝的旨意，上帝的手底下咧来控制，所以因也是无拒绝来为着巴比伦国来做工。
This reminds us that our calling is not to form Christian societies that are isolated from the world around us.
提醒咱讲说咱今仔日伫这个教会内面，咱毋是要来组织一寡基督教的这个团体就是这个团体，然后要对这个世界分别出来。
On the contrary, we should be active in pursuing the common good of the community in which God has placed us, whatever challenges may face us.
相反的咱应该就真正积极的来追求上帝将咱放伫这个社区顶面内面，看伊伊的旨意什么，咱就怎样帮助来得到这个共同的利益啊。
Now, in response to the process of reprogramming, as the 4 young men accepted the will of God for their lives and served the Babylonian community, they inwardly resisted the pagan reprogramming. Inwardly.
对伫这个巴比伦国所予因的这款的改造这4个青年人因虽然接受上帝的旨意来服侍服务这个巴比伦的这个社会但是咱知影伫因的心中因伫遐拒绝受这种异教的改造。
First, they did not refuse to answer when called by their Babylonian names.
头前就是跟应该换名，并且用巴比伦国的名来叫因的时阵，因并无伫遐来反对甲拒绝因。
They actually maintained their Jewish names and identities as well.
但是因犹原保持因犹太人、以色列人的这个名字甲因的身份。
They lived with dual names as a reminder of their identities and as a reminder of the true nature of their God.
因我的时阵，因用两个名就是双的名个，一个就是要提醒因看因的身份是啥物，用一方面的提醒因讲说因所相信的上帝的本性是啥物。
Here we are reminded to take every opportunity to celebrate our heavenly citizenship with other believers.
对于这件代志顶面，咱受提醒，咱就会记挑每一个机会来庆祝咱做天国子民的这个国家。
Second, in response to re-education, The four preserve their biblical knowledge and perspective in the midst of a thoroughly pagan education system.
第二點就是對這個改造的回應啊，因四個人繼續保存因對這個上帝的話語的知識及觀點因為安尼因就記住這個異教的教育的系統。
They armed themselves with biblical discernment into its follies and flaws, and we are to do the same as well.
因利用聖經的假使來裝備因家己，來分別這種唔對愚講及缺陷的這個異教的制度。
Third, this is kind of an interesting part. In response to the food, Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, as what we read from Daniel 1:8-16.
第三點對伫但以理書第1章第8到16節，咱看到講但以理立志無要用王的食物及伊所的酒來玷污家己。
The issue here was not that these foods are not Jewish food, nor it has been offered to idols. That's not the issue.
這個問題並唔是講到講這物件是屬於巴比倫國的食物還是講這因為唔是猶太人所咧食的物件，還是講這物件已經受限喺這種偶像的面前啊。
If that was the reason, Daniel would have had abstained permanently from it, but which does not seem the case in chapter 10, verse 3.
因為當這物件若是完全的這個邪惡還是玷污咯，咱就知影講說但以理的完全永遠的袂要去擔這種物件，但是咱對在10章第3節，咱看到講並唔是安尼啊。
The key to understanding why they abstained from these food is to notice that they chose to eat only food that naturally grow, grains and vegetables, and they only drink water.
我能明白，咱了解講說哦，因敢若無要食這種物件，是因為因願意選擇講說這種自然生長的物件，親像五穀、蔬菜，然後伊時候要啉水。
This suggests a reminder of their dependence upon their creator for their food, not the king of Babylon.
因為因愛用安尼來提醒家己講說，因所倚靠的收取因食物的是創造因的上帝，唔是尼布甲尼撒王。
So also we need to build into our daily routines constant reminders of our dependence upon God for all of the good things in our lives.
因為咱着佇咱逐日的生活當中來提醒咱家己。講說，咱佇生命所得的一切好處是完全倚靠上帝而得的。
Even such a simple act of giving thanks for our food may be profound reminder of who has provided it for us.
就是真正簡單的一個謝恩謝飯的祈禱哈，就是我能親切的伫遐提醒咱講說，是誰來供給咱。
Also, Daniel and his friends sought to maintain their faithfulness to God by working within the Babylonian system, not against it.
我仲話一項就是咱看到講，但以理甲伊的朋友因祈求方法來保持佇這個巴比倫的制度的內面保持因對上帝的忠心。
They sought permission from the chief official for their personalized diet plan in verse 18.
第18節甲咱講說，因當這個太監長來要求並且允准，互因得到允准來得到因這個因家己個別的這個現實的方法。
And proposed a 10-day test. 10-day test.
因並且提出講說，會用10日來做。
Surprisingly, at the end of this time, Daniel and his friends looked fitter than those who had been indulged in the high-calorie lifestyle.
真奇妙就是當這個減輕計了的時陣但以利甲伊的朋友看起來比懷伊咧啉食真正高熱量的這種生活方式的人佫顯得佫較健康
So, for 3 years, the guard agreed to continue to provide them their alternative way of life, by which they could maintain their constant awareness of the one true God.
因為安尼所以這個委辦就同意講說第3年來按照因所選擇的生活方式來互因食甲穿因為安尼因就法當講說通一直的保持對上帝無停的這個了解
My friends, today we have learned so much of God's faithfulness to His covenant.
第一個，咱今仔日對這個這段經文，咱學習到講說，上帝對伊所立的約是真正信實的。
The good news of the gospel is not simply that God is faithful to those who are faithful to Him. It is that a Savior has come to deliver faithless and compromised saints like us.
今仔日的好消息就是這個福音並唔是單單甲咱講說上帝是信實的對佇遮信靠伊的人，但是伊卻甲咱講說有一個救主來到要拯救的拯救的是什麼人拯救就是遮無忠心，並且同埋妥協的親像咱遮人。
Our salvation rests not on our ability to remain undefiled by the world, but rather on the pure and undefiled offering that Jesus has provided in our place.
咱的救恩並唔是在咱有什麼能力通來拒絕，或者講說保持咱家己無受這個世界來玷污乃是在乎為咱提供這個純潔而且無受玷污的祭物就是耶穌基督為咱所擺上的。
Jesus Christ came voluntarily into this world with all of its pain, all of its trials.
耶穌基督帶着出來痛苦甲艱難但是伊卻自願來到這個世界來為着咱。
And he endured far greater temptations and sufferings than Daniel did, or than we ever will.
耶穌基督來到世上的時陣，伊所忍受的這種試探、痛苦通講是比但以理當時所受的更較多當時也是咱每一個人所拄到的痛苦是永遠袂甲伊袂比擬的。
What is more, Jesus has already returned from his exile and now sits at the right hand of the Father in heaven.
什么更加重要呢？耶稣基督今仔日一定对伫这个受掠，就是来到世间这样代志一定觉醒了。现在伊一定坐伫天父上帝伫天国迄个所在的正边。
He has prepared our place there, and his presence there already is the guarantee that one day we will be with him as his people.
伊去为咱备办所在，伊伫迄个所在证明公式是一个对咱一日咱要去到伊个所在，甲伊做一个正做伊主民的一个保证。
The cross is the means by which God's faithfulness redeems the unfaithful.
上帝借着十字架救赎了无信的人，来到上帝的这个信息的内面。
The resurrection and the ascension are the guarantee of our inheritance in heaven.
搁活甲升天这样代志，保证公说，咱会伫天国承受这个产业。
So, my friends, lastly, allow me to remind us of the application. Remind ourselves of the gospel.
咱借着今仔日的信息来应用伫咱的生命，头一点，咱得用福音来提醒咱家己。
Let us fix our eyes on Jesus crucified, raised, and exalted.
咱就将咱的目睭注目伫耶稣基督受定、国活甲提受升天这样代志。
Trust in him and ask him to put us in places where we can be a blessing to our community.
咱就信靠伊，并且向伊祈求，互伊将咱放伫即座社会的所在，互咱有法通诚济因的祝福。
Third, be a breath of heavenly wisdom in our home, school, workplace.
过来就是讲，咱伫咱工作的所在，咱的学堂，咱的厝内，诚济天国的智慧的一个气。
Fourth, be consistently depend upon his sanctifying work.
第四点就是讲，咱着始终会活靠伊的正性的工作。
Let us look to Jesus to keep us faithful, not to be our best efforts to be a Daniel.
咱着看上帝，并且仰望伊，互咱保持咱诚济忠心，而毋是活靠咱家己的努力来诚济这个但以理。
Lastly, long for the day when his heavenly kingdom will invade this earth and bring the fullness of our inheritance.
最后，咱就渴望迄一日，当伊的天国侵入伫咱的地球，并且带来咱要承受的丰盛的产业。
My friends, I hope you enjoyed your worship service this morning as we have studied the faithfulness of God in the life of the exiled people.
第一要我感谢你，感谢主，我希望公司对今仔日的信息，你会真正得到帮助，因为咱对但以理的生活生命中看得到上帝完全信息。
May the Lord use us mightily wherever we are to show our faith in Jesus.
上帝无借着伊来使用咱，无论咱伫什么所在，靠着耶稣基督的救恩来，互咱国家我当荣耀。
God bless you.
对，祝福你。